Good day. Welcome to the Frankly Speaking podcast, episode 9. The Brownstone courthouse that didn't have to burn down, the gun license cesspool, and remembering Winston Babatunde Witter. Plus, ice trucks and sawdust. All these and more in this week's Frankly Speaking podcast of Jamaican news, commentary, and insights. But as usual, we start with a quick review of the Sunday newspapers. The Sunday Observer outdid itself this week with a huge number of fresh as well as sidebar or follow-up news stories, starting with its front page. Bizarre murder of a woman. There, it digs into an underreported story about a woman who was killed and her body dumped in St. Catherine. I will spare you the horrible details of the state in which the body of the 30-year-old woman, Leona Thomas, was found. However, she was reportedly doing deliveries for Grace Kennedy in the Central Village area when apparently she was ambushed, the truck she was driving was stripped of goods, and she was killed. And the heartlessness is not just what they did to her body, but reporter Amar De Leon says that her killers took her keys, went to her house, stole a washing machine, and emptied her refrigerator. There is good reporting in follow-ups or tangential stories to the big gun story of the week. Again, the Sunday Observer reports that Shane Darling is fearful of his life, and perhaps the most important stories in the paper is by H.G. Helps. There is good reporting in follow-ups to the big gun story of the week. The Sunday Observer reports that Shane Darling is fearful of his life. And they give that a big place on page 3. But perhaps the most important story in the paper is by H.G. Helps. He reports that when 2 ministers of government died, Easton Douglas of the PNP and Dwight Nelson of the JLP, they were found to have left a total of more than 12 firearms. Yes, more than 12. There are stories too about children and how they see violence, and a story about the delight of nearly 300 people in receiving Jamaican citizenship. The Observer, to use a cliche, is chock full of stories this week. Now, the Gleaner takes off on a story about the son of a slain Chinese couple. He's reflecting on how his gun license application was twice denied, even though there had been several robberies at his parents' supermarket in St. Elizabeth before they were executed in a robbery last month. The sports pages also have a lot regarding the coming Gibson McCook relays and athletes that are expected to do well. But where is the story about Fast Elaine's magnificent return to the track in Birmingham, England on Saturday? Now to Jamaican Perspectives. A refrigerator or a fridge is now a standard fixture in even the most humble of Jamaican homes. It wasn't always so. Indeed, years after independence, people managed the functions of the fridge through buying slabs or blocks of ice, preserving that ice for days while keeping the perishables and making drinks cold or cool and refreshing. Ice could be bought in 25 pound, 50 pound or 100 pound blocks and kept at home. Of course, most people bought small amounts, not even a pound from the shop, enough for cooling drinks for a family meal. Large amounts were preserved by being put into a hole, dug into the ground and maintained for the purpose with sawdust from wood. People who were more organized made an icebox, a rectangular or near square-shaped container out of wood and lined with zinc for insulation. And again, that was packed with sawdust. That could keep your blocks of ice for 2 or even 3 days or more. The ice truck was thus a feature of communities in the capital city as well as some rural towns and byways. The men who carried ice from trucks were very agile and dexterous. leaping some 3 feet from the extended tailgate from the moving truck and using those large metal tongues as they swung the ice hand to hand, keeping their balance and forward motion at the same time. The click of the tongues freed of their ice and the bang against the boarded body of the truck were a language of their own. Those deliveries ensured cold water, the keeping of some meats and some cool drinks for festivities such as weddings and big celebrations. There were some who, following Hurricane Gilbert and weeks without cold water and having to tolerate hot beer, there are some who remembered the ice truck, the ice box, the sawdust, and then when JPS put the lights on again, we knew the importance again of the free. Now to my commentary, frankly speaking. Last week Sunday night, the Brownstown Courthouse in St. Anne was completely gutted by fire. It did not have to happen. Frankly speaking, the Brownstown Courthouse should not have burnt down. The cost to the people is great and yet undetermined. This also sets back the court system in St. Anne, where years ago there were as many as 7 courthouses. Now there are 2. Ocherius, you may not know, doesn't have a courthouse. That's going nearly 20 years now. Frankly speaking, the Brownstown Courthouse building and its contents did not have to be destroyed. The Brownstown Fire Department, less than a quarter mile away, responded immediately to the call they got at 7:59 p.m. They responded with 1 unit. But the fire hydrant within 300 yards of the courthouse building was at first not accessible. The Brownstown unit and then 2 others from 15 miles away in St. Anne's Bay had to be ferrying water from a source more than a mile away from the fire. Therefore, just understand this, the fire raged unimpeded for several minutes at a time. Not a single hose turned on it while the water was being sourced. Frankly speaking, the fact is there was no constant water supply or source available to fight the fire, which was finally put out after nearly 2.5 hours. Indeed, as almost everyone at the scene will tell you, it seemed at one point, about an hour into the fire, that it was being brought under control and was still confined to the bottom of 2 floors when all the units were away getting water. It is then that we saw the spectacular leap of flames. The ceiling of the first floor, the roof of the second floor, the wooden stairway inside, all collapsed, providing fuel for the fire. That was the end of the courthouse, but for the walls of stone and lime and concrete left standing. Frankly speaking, a water truck from Noranda that had regularly assisted the fire department was not called until some 90 minutes after the fire started. By the time it arrived to plug into the fire department's water chain, the building had been completely burnt out. I have not been able to determine how much was recently spent on rehabilitating the Brownstown Courthouse building, but frankly speaking, what we know is that it had no water sprinkler system that would have put out the fire when it started. That's something that modern buildings now have, and old buildings now carry. We know too that there was no hydrant on the premises of this important government building that backs onto the police station and jailhouse and a branch of the tax office. And, frankly speaking, we know and saw too that though fire trucks were able to enter from Top Road and get within 10 feet of the building, the trucks could not access the grounds from downslope on Main Street, where the gate columns were too close to allow entry of the fire engines. And so, water had to be directed at the fire up a considerable slope from a truck some 50 feet or so away from the building. You may call the whole thing a fireman's nightmare. Frankly speaking, it did not have to happen. It ought not to have happened, and a full-scale independent investigation is required, if for no other reason than to help reduce the vulnerability of other buildings in other towns and to ensure some efficacy, if not accountability, in the fire department. Now to Crosstalk. Crosstalk this week is about gun licenses. Here is Desmond Richards, journalist and businessman, with his take.
Under the Firearms Act passed by the colonial legislature, In 1947, the privilege to own and carry firearms was largely dependent on citizens' socio-political class and color. The act was revised by the independent legislature in 1967, opening the system for individuals to own firearms and ammunition after application to a superintendent of police was approved. Under the new system, superintendents of police across Jamaica held the keys to who and how many firearm licenses were approved. Of course, more licenses meant more sale of guns and ammunition and a thriving business for gun dealers. What should have been a progressive move for the security of the citizens led to the building of an evil empire which saw one agency of the state corrupt in the process, selling firearm licenses to drug dealers and gang leaders all over the country. So while rank and file policemen and women were working tirelessly to disarm criminals, their superiors were stuffing their pockets with dirty money and undermining law and order in the country. How many innocent people among the long list of murder victims over the years were killed by licensed gun criminals? How many policemen were killed by guns obtained and facilitated by those who are sworn and paid to protect life and property? This criminal enterprise was smashed in 2006 following an investigative expose by the now defunct Herald. The government took away the issuing of firearm licenses from the police and handed it over to a new civilian body, the Firearms Licensing Authority. That change was welcome, but politicians are always setting up systems with loopholes for them and their friends to escape. Here we had evidence that state actors had corrupt the process, yet they failed to legislate tough laws to send perpetrators on retirement in prisons. Instead, they fertilized the corrupt system, combining the police with political operatives who sit on boards where decisions are made on who gets gun licenses. Here we are, corrupt police doing background checks on applicants, which are sent to corrupt board members for approval, and the minister has veto power to override any decision. So far, secrets are coming out. Over 1,000 gun licenses have been revoked. But we have heard nothing, absolutely nothing, about the corrupt officials in the security ministry who are participants in this saga. No more swapping monkey for black dog. Amend the Firearms Act so that state agents who sell gun licenses to criminals can be sentenced to life imprisonment. Start cleaning the well at the top and clean water will filter down.
That was Desmond Richards, and now my take. Gun licenses are much sought after in Jamaica, and many people who have gone through the process to get one have failed and have been left unprotected, and they feel bad about it. We know that a criminal teen or young gunman is not so constrained and can generally with ease get a choice of guns, one to rent or borrow or buy. As for many things, the Jamaican government has, on the face of it, pretty good concept of an organization to supervise the award of such licenses and superintend the awardees. That's the Firearm Licensing Authority, FLA. But as with so many systems, the gun license distribution and award has been infected by corruption. Shane Darling, the CEO of the FLA, has provided a detailed picture of the septic pit that it has been for some time and that he has been trying to drain. Whether he stays or not, and I hope he stays and is supported with the resources and the will to do the job of cleaning, it is a job that needs to be done. The FLA must be cleaned up. It seems to me too that there ought to be a rethink and a new culture about the awarding of licenses for guns. Why should it be so hard for the law-abiding citizen who feels he or she needs to protect herself or himself by having a gun? Why should it be so hard to get a license for one? We know already that the police, try as they may, cannot provide protection for all of us. And largely, There are only a few instances when we have seen irresponsibility and unacceptable behavior in the use of the gun by licensed firearm holders. It's time to at least change the equation such that the gunman, the gangster, would have to think twice or three times to prepare himself to know that the next woman or man he attacks may have her own or his own irons and is trained to use it to protect herself or himself and family. We are told that people have offered up to $5 million in a bribe for a license. That speaks to two things: their desperation in getting one and their desire for having one legally. Most of those people encouraged to support corruption by paying the bribe know they could offer a guy on the corner a tiny fraction of the requested bribe to get one illegally. And legal or not, guns have the same effect. I couldn't close out without a word to Winston Babatunde Witter, a tribute. Winston Babatunde Witter was well prepared through his service to journalism by the time he took on Straight Talk, the daytime call-in program on KLAS radio at the end of the 1990s. He made it Jamaica's most popular daytime public affairs or call-in program. Baba, as the people in the streets called him, was becoming a folk hero. One doesn't know if even he had thought that the program could ever have been so popular. But Witter, humble Witter, biting wit, stayed true to journalism and championed the cause of the people. Following the motorcycle crash that changed his life, at the very time he was at the pinnacle of his career, Winston lived a life that pained many who knew him close. May his soul rest in peace. News has come too of the passing of Paul Robertson, a former powerful PNP General Secretary, Minister, and an MP. May his soul rest in peace. And for this week, please look out. The Bank of Jamaica has raised its policy interest rates by a whopping 1.5%, or 150 basis points, all with the intent of dragging down the inflation rate that's toying with double digits. Meantime, watch the dollar that yo-yoed around 157 and 158 to 1 US last week as gas prices step up yet again to punish. The Bank of Jamaica has raised its policy interest rates by a whopping 1.5%, or 150 basis points, all with the intent of dragging down the inflation rate that's toying with double digits. Meantime, watch the dollar that yo-yoed around 157 and 158 to 1 US last week as gas prices stepped up yet again to punishing record levels. That's the Frankly Speaking podcast for this week. Please share and comment and let us know if there are any issues or perspectives you'd like us to share. Thank you for subscribing. I'm Franklin McKnight. Until then.